Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you the process of creating this digital painting in Procreate. Now, this was my first time using Procreate, so I did make a lot of mistakes. I'm going to share with you my 5 main mistakes that I made and give you solutions, what to do instead, so you don't have to make the same mistakes that I did. So starting off, right off the bat, there's my first mistake, not adding a wash of colour, not adding a base colour to the whole face. This would have made it so much easier for myself if I just cover the whole face in a medium colour, not the lightest, not the darkest, somewhere in the middle. And I could have gone off of there, adding the dark, adding the warmer tones, and adding the highlights to that, which would have prevented my second mistake, which was leaving a lot of white gaps. Leaving white gaps meant that when I went into blending the colours together, they wouldn't blend straight into the colour. They would kind of blend into the white and then into the next colour, as I'm going to show you here. So instead of doing this, I recommend filling in the gaps or overlapping as much as you can, just every white gap filled with a colour. So here I did that. However, here's an extra mistake that I made. I'm going to show you is the brush that you use to blend. Just don't use an airbrush. I think the airbrush is made so that the outer parts of the brush blends out into white as if it was sprayed on, which meant that it made the colours paler and desaturated, which meant I had to go back again and add more colour to bring more depth and more saturation again and again. So instead, use a different brush. Now there's different stages of blending, but I think for the first stage of blending, you should use a fairly small to medium sized brush, and with one with a hard edge, so not all faded out on the edges. I'm using a flat brush here, which works very well for the initial stage of blending. Just the splodges of color that you put on the page, just blending them together. My third mistake was using too many colors, but what I mean by this is using so many tiny little brush strokes of all these different colors, when instead I could put down a few blocks of colors that blend into each other to make colors in between them. However, as I said, this was my very first painting, even my first portrait painting in general, I believe. At least one that I took seriously, so I didn't mind taking my time. So I pretty much mentioned this already briefly in many ways, but I kept having to go back to adding colors because they were not intense, and there were a lot of factors in that. Firstly, my wash of colour was not there in the beginning. Secondly, I use very small brush strokes. Thirdly, I blended those tiny little brush strokes on the white page with an airbrush that kind of the small amount of colour that was on the page, it made it disappear basically. Again, you have to put in a big wash of colour all over the face, add bigger blocks of colour instead of tiny little strokes, and then blend it with a nice hard brush. The straight edge brush is great. So before my last mistake, these are my favorite features. The color swatching is very helpful for when you're bad at mixing color and you take ages finding the right color. That was such a game changer. Really helped me with the skin tones. Even if I picked a color and I had to adjust it, it was still better than mixing it from scratch. It was easy to adjust elements as well. So let's say I drew the nose too low or something. I didn't, but if I did, then I can select it with the tool and move it up higher. And I did this with the face. I drew it quite high up on the page, and when I wanted to add the hair, I had to move it back down. Another thing was the brushes. There's so many options and textures and background textures you can add with just a brush. I mean, that's what I did in the end. I added a wood textured background with a brush, and then the hair strokes I'm going to show you as well. I blended it with a hair tool and a blending brush. And lastly, the time-lapse feature, it does it automatically, so it records it. I believe you have to make sure that it's on, and it records the time-lapse for you that you can watch back, and that is so cool. I love watching it back. It's so satisfying how everything's done so quickly, like without a mistake. It seems like it. Now at this point, I've got my layout, got my face done, I've got my hair, figured out how I want it to look like, and my last mistake introduced itself at this point. This was the mistake of trying to draw each hair stroke in one by one. So I used a little pen tool, tried drawing in the hairs, and that took ages, plus it didn't look natural because the hair kind of clumps up together naturally. So I'm going to show you what I did with when I found the hair stroke tool. It's a brush where you can draw hair strokes. This is what I did, and it didn't look good either. So here I'm showing you the highlights and the shadows, and I'm sure you can make this work if you really put yourself into it, but it's more effort than the technique that I happen to figure out, and I believe the technique looks better as well. So here, side by side, the different tones, I mean, one is warmer, one's cooler, but you get the idea. The blending looks a lot better, and I started doing that here. I just added random splodges of color, of dark to light, and then grabbed the same brush hair stroke tool, but used it as a blending brush and just blended them together. So here I'm showing you a closer overview of the technique of blending the colors. So it's very easy. You just add the splodges. I don't know what's going on with my dark shade. It's a bit dark, but yeah, you just grab that tool I showed you there in materials. I used the medium one, and you just go up and down and it's done. So that's what I ended up doing. Here I did add individual strokes to kind of deepen the hair. It's still looking quite two-dimensional, so I added a darker shade of brown to deepen it with strokes, and then also for the highlights I added individual strokes as well. Let me know if these mistakes were relatable to you when you started out, and if you don't do digital art but you were inspired, I recommend just start. Just draw anything and develop your skills. It can be anything. It's definitely a useful skill to have. There's plenty of tutorials for you if you are not sure about techniques about a certain thing. There's many videos of other artists that create amazing art. So thank you for all of you that watched this far. If you found this video to be useful and you enjoyed it, click the like button. Keep an eye out for more videos. I love making art videos as well as beauty related content.